So let me introduce you to the Turing-Roche Knowledge Share Series. The aim is to bring together members of the Turing-Roche networks and the wider scientific community to hear different perspectives on topics in data science and to build new connections. To get us started, let me go through a couple of slides to give you an intro to the partnership. Hopefully you can all see the slides. Let me know if there are any issues. As per the name, it is a partnership between the Turing and Roche. I guess most of you are familiar with at least one of these organizations. In case you're not, the Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI, and it's built around a network of university, industry, charity, and government partners. Roche is a leading healthcare company with a long-term interest in personalized healthcare, and they are one of our growing number of academic partnerships. The partnership was launched in 2021, and its 5-year mission is summarized by our partnership North Star. The goal is to collaborate to achieve a better understanding of patient and disease heterogeneity, essentially why patients respond differently to treatment and why diseases can manifest in different ways in different people. Our approach is illustrated on the right of the slide, with our main focus being on developing methodologies in statistics and machine learning to improve healthcare. We have focused our research into 3 different themes: structured missingness, to deal with missing data. You will hear more about this very, very soon. In particular, when it exhibits a structure, predictive modeling, to construct models that are robust to uncertainty and heterogeneity and are transparent. And lastly, multimodal analysis to effectively combine different data modalities to improve clinical care. Our partnership core team is pictured here with representatives from Turing and Roche, which is expanded by the research associates funded by the partnership and our enrichment students. Without further ado, let me allow the Turing scientific lead of the partnership, Ben MacArthur, to introduce the speaker for today's event.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, that was great. Thanks, Maria. It's a great pleasure to welcome Robin today to give us, there he is. That's a young Robin.
Name.
Joanna's name on
Oh. Not sure how that happened. Robin, as Maria said, Robin is our lead for the structured missingness theme, and you've been with us since I think 2022. 2021. Okay, so right from the start. So we've been working on this theme for a few years, and Robin's going to give us an update on that side of our work. Robin is Professor of Statistics at UCL. Before that, he was at Cardiff and Lancaster, and early on at Southampton, which is where I am. So I'm going to pass over to Robin. I think the slides are just going to appear. Is that right?
Yes,
I think
just
so.
let me...
So over to you, Robin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is okay, the slide changes.
Just bear with me a second.
Oh,
You can use it now.
yeah. Okay, so yeah, the mouse shows. Okay. Okay. Thank you everyone. So yeah, it was thank you for the introduction, and yeah, it's always sad to see that photo. It sort of shows how much I've aged, but I need to get a new one up there. Not Joanna, sadly.
So sorry.
But, thank you very much for the invite and for the introduction. This is, I've done a few knowledge shares, and this is the last knowledge share I think that we'll be doing as a partnership before it starts to come to an end. So I kind of wanted to just start, if that's okay, a little bit to give a bit of a background. Actually, there's a bit of an overlap with what Maria has talked about and Ben, so I might be a little briefer than I intended on that, but just to sort of look back at what we've sort of achieved, I guess, through the structured missingness theme briefly, and then go into this, let's say, the scientific academic part of the talk, review some sort of relevant classical missing data concepts, and and then we'll go through structured missingness as a, define that, what we mean by that. We sort of coined the term, I guess, in through this theme, but define it and kind of characterize it. We'll then go into some methods to address structured missingness. So we first looked at some imputation approaches, which had some promise, although there are also some challenges there, and that sort of motivated our current program of work, which is sort of looking at another way. Currently, we're calling it a non-imputation approach to deal with structured missingness. So probably be a little bit brief on that because of time, but I try to cover what I can there and just end a few conclusions. Okay, so I don't need to repeat the beginning, but I guess this is all taken from the website. But as Maria said, this Turing-Roche partnership was established in 2021, and it's trying to improve understanding of patient disease heterogeneity, and essentially, as I see it, it's hopefully going to make some important advances in the area of precision or personalized medicine. And the key thing, I guess, that sort of kind of brought me into this is that to achieve goals here, typically need to require utilizing some complex data sources, big complex data sources. And I think one challenge that was noticed quite early on was that they're missing data, missing values in the data, right? And so not only were they present in the data, they were present in, let's say, a certain way, which I'll come on to in a little bit. And that led to this structured missingness theme being established, which I think was a driving theme of the partnership back in 2021. And so just to look back a little bit at various things we've done, this isn't by any means an exhaustive list, but we started off by holding a series of community workshops back in November 2021. And that was a really interesting, really engaged group of participants we had there, even more so because it was still in the post-pandemic part of the sort of like life, I guess, and we had to do everything online. And so we had these online workshops, and we had a lot of engagement through that, and that actually led us to preparing this Grand Challenges paper, which we got published in Nature Machine Intelligence in January 2023, and I think that's really generated a lot of useful discussions and feedback after that. And actually, I was just having a conversation with Ben and Rohan saying, oh, I wish it was on 99 citations on my Google Scholar, and I just checked before and it reached 100 today. So, Google Scholar, so there's a bit of noise there. It might be a bit concise, but yeah, which for a stats, for us coming from a stats background as I am, it's quite unprecedented given it was only published in 2023. But more than that, it's not just about citations. We've had lots of engagement with different groups of researchers following the publication of that paper. And so it was nice to see that we haven't just invented a challenge ourselves, that this seemed to resonate with different scientific groups and communities. We've also got a paper following on from that that's looking at trying to characterize all the different types of SM that can manifest. There's more than you might think, and I'll talk a bit about that in this presentation, as well as sort of trying to address structured missingness through imputation. And as I say, there's some ongoing work to explore non-imputation methods as well. But it's not just about the papers. We've had some fun, let's say, along the way. We prepared a 1-minute nature video, which is on their YouTube channel. I can share the link if anyone's interested. I need to make fun of my bad acting skills, which I had to do for that video. But various things we've done other than papers. But for the talk today, as you might expect, I'm going to focus on all things in bold, primarily the research that we've been doing to address structured missingness. Okay, and just I also want to give a big shout out to as much as the research has been really great to do, it's been also great to connect with a nice community or family of researchers. There's too many to list everyone, and apologies for the people I may not have listed here, but I've tried to list as many people as I can that we've had frequent interactions with. So anyone else, you know who you are, but yeah, it's really great to interact with some really great academics and researchers across a variety of different sectors. Just give special mention to James and Victor, who are our PDRAs, former and current, employed on this theme to drive a lot of this research forward. And also, definitely don't want to forget about the exceptional support from the non-academic community. We had some really great support from the ATI in terms of the program managers, Maria here, of course. Vicky, I don't know if she's on the call, but Vicky was a really great community engagement manager we had for a large part of the partnership. Okay, so let's get into the science. So missing data. What are the sort of so we have this sort of missing data challenge we want to address, and that's sort of because it's often encountered, right? When you deal with real world data, I'm pretty certain most people on this joining this meeting will have encountered missing values. Its presence complicates analyses and also can introduce bias, so we have to do something about it. And the first thing to note is that not all missing data are the same. So in order to sort of distinguish between different types of missing data, we consider a mechanism, we typically call it, that produces the missing values. That sort of resulted in the missing values occurring. And so the way that the sort of classical framework has been sort of developed around this is you typically have, say, a variable in a data set X, let's call it xj, that has some missing values, and let's assume, just for simplicity, that all the other variables in the data are fully observed. So we'll denote those variables by x minus j. And to accompany xj, then we have a missing data indicator vector. Whereas when an element in xj is missing, then that corresponding element in mj, let's say the ith element, mij will be 1. And otherwise, if xij is observed, mij will be 0. So a 0, 1 indicator vector. And then what we can use that to formulate different types of missing data mechanisms. So we've got a conditional distribution we model for mj given x and some parameters phi for the model. And depending on the type of conditional distribution we have, we'll have a different type of missing data mechanism. So I've listed them in increasing orders of, say, complexity or difficulty to handle. So the first one is missing completely at random, where the conditional distribution of mj doesn't depend on x at all. It's just missing data occurs to purely a random sample of your observations in the data. And then the second scenario is when mj depends on the observed data, so x minus j, but not xj. So conditional on x minus j, mj is independent of xj. That's missing at random. And then the last one is where mj depends on xj as well as maybe x minus j. So the missing values in xj depend on themselves, basically. The probability to be missing, I should say, in xj depends on the missing values themselves. And that's missing not at random, which is the most problematic setting. So as I say, MNR is really problematic. It's perhaps the most problematic thing about it is that it's untestable. So based on the original sample, you won't be able to know if it's present or not. And it, of course, will likely cause bias and other sorts of problems. Typically in the literature, that's why you often see the assumption of MAR, because something can be done there, and you can have models that can address the problem. Although there is a literature on MNAR, some things that people have done there, I won't focus on that in this talk. Going back to the taxonomy, though, firstly, it's served us very well for many decades. And it's particularly useful, though, when attention is on a relatively small number of variables in terms of how you want to sort of list out the mechanisms. But of course, that isn't, more recent sort of work is now moving beyond that, certainly in areas of sort of AI, and you're considering increasingly highly multivariate settings, big data sets, lots of variables. And so obviously you wouldn't expect to just see missing data occur in just one variable, xj. You're going to see missing data occurring across, say, p variables in x. And so you're going to, instead of just having a missing data vector mj, you'd have a missing data indicator matrix m. And so that makes these decompositions, while technically maybe possible in some ways, increasingly more complex and sometimes impractical. And one thing this is what we sort of ended up noticing, in terms of relation to this research theme, is that we often get a phenomenon known as structured missingness arising. That's the term we coined in that original paper in Nature Machine Intelligence, and it requires careful, bespoke attention. So what do we mean by structured missingness? And I'll be sort of probably increasingly referring to it as SM for short, because it gets mentioned a lot. So it refers to relationships or structure characterizing the missing data process. It's going to be increasingly likely to be encountered as we utilize ever larger, more complex databases, often that are going to be combined at scale across these different sources. I'll give illustrations of that in a little bit. And the idea is, sort of conceptually, we have M as a missing data matrix now, comprising P variables or columns, corresponding to our sort of data matrix X. And we're going to assume there's going to be now relationships or dependencies between the MJ, so between the columns in M. Okay, together with any relationships that might be captured between M and X. So relationships between M and X are sort of the classical taxonomy that we're familiar with, MCAR, MAR, and so forth. But this, let's say, the additional layer that we're now introducing are when there's the relationships or dependencies between the M's as well. Now, these relationships can be strong, deterministic, or weak, probabilistic, or some mixture of the two. And so that, as you can expect, means that there are many different ways this can manifest. And so just to give you a first few visual illustrations, and more coming in a minute, from left to right, the red squares denote missing values in a data set. And we can see on the left, we have classic unstructured missing data sort of patterns, mechanism, where we just have them sort of randomly distributed in the sort of second half of the columns of the data. The second instance is what we're going to call a strong or block missingness mechanism, where we see that if you're missing in one of the last four variables, you're guaranteed to be missing in the other three. So creating that block structure. And the last one is sort of what we can think of as a weak block or weak structured missingness, where if you're missing in one of the last four variables, you're not guaranteed to be missing in the other three of those four, but you're more likely to be missing, basically. And so that's sort of some relatively simple, maybe somewhat quite clear, distinct differences between these different mechanisms. And so, as you can imagine, this isn't sort of completely new, but some of these structured missingness mechanisms result in some special cases, so monotone block missing data patterns, as we've seen. But it's not just those. There's more to structured missingness than just that. And so that led us to sort of think quite carefully about characterizing the different types of structured missingness. So we have terms that we introduced, strong structure, weak structure, as well as the unstructured original case, which are classical types of missingness that we previously were familiar with. In addition to that, we also considered other types of unstructured cases that may not have really been sort of put together in one piece of work, I guess. So you can think of probabilistic unstructured as well as deterministic structured. I'll give some illustrations of that in a minute. And the crucial point is we're not trying to replace the existing taxonomy of MCAR, MAR, and MNAR. We're sort of embedding these within those. So we're not seeing this as an alternative way to view missing data mechanisms. Rather, we're sort of broadening the types of missing data mechanisms to reflect structure together with the existing taxonomy. And so, as I say, we have this working paper we're hoping to get published in the near future that provides a complete characterization of all the types of structured missingness. And importantly, in that paper we have, which is on archive, we provide contextual examples for each case. So we're not just sort of, it was important that we didn't just invent these in our mind, that they're just mathematical properties that could exist. We also thought about practical instances that these could arise, primarily in the clinical setting, but it could, I guess, conceivably be translated to other settings. So there are real world sort of instances you could think that these types of structured missingness could arise. One thing that we did is in that paper is we also wanted to graphically illustrate these missing data mechanisms, providing all the information to characterize them through directed graphs. So I'm really glad that Chris is here, because this is really Chris's idea. He sort of shared his idea with us, and we sort of comprehensively then put it into the paper. So, and I think this has received a nice, from people I've talked to, they've really appreciated these kind of visual illustrations of different types of structured missingness. So this is so basically what you need to know is they're going to be squares, diamonds, different types of diamonds, and arrows, and then that kind of altogether can kind of give you what you need for these structured missingness, right? So it's not too much to kind of have to absorb, but this is already builds up a very rich picture of different structured missingness, even with relatively simple building blocks, let's say. So the idea is these squares denote the variables, so the x's, x1, x2, x3 here. The diamonds are the missing data indicators, so M1, M2, M3. And if you have a solid diamond, that means that variable is fully observed. And hollow diamond, I guess let's call it, that indicates there's missing values. So you're missing, it's actually using my cursor because most people are online. So basically you've got missing data in x2 and x3, fully observed in x1. And the first instance is unstructured, missing completely at random. So the usual missing completely at random that you're familiar with. So no relationships between the m's and the x's, and no relationships between the m's, between the diamonds, so no arrows, missing completely at random. But now we've got missing at random, unstructured. So this is like, again, usual missing at random, probabilistic. So I should have said there's two types of edges, the dashed edge, two sets of arrows, dashed arrow, probabilistic, solid arrow, deterministic. And so this is saying that given x1, there's some probability, probabilistically, to be missing in x2 and x3. But crucially, there's no arrows between x2 and m2, x3 and m3, for example. So it's not missing. It's not missing not at random, missing at. But in the third plot, you have these vertical arrows going up, say, as well as between them as well. And so now you've got missing not at random, but no arrows between the diamonds, right? So because there's no arrows between the diamonds, there's no dependencies between the ends. So it's still unstructured, but missing not at random. So this is a classic unstructured, usual MCAR, MAR, MNAR being conceptualized through these plots. So that is one of the scenarios we can consider here. Okay, but now we can go into looking at some structured missingness. We're going to focus on this instance here of strong structure, so like deterministic missingness. So this is basically the first plot is a deterministic missing data pattern saying that given some values of x1, you're definitely going to be missing in x2 and x3, but it's still unstructured because there's no arrows between the diamonds. Moving on to missing at random still. We've now got strong structure between the different missing data indicators. And I know that this can become a lot of information quite quickly, but hopefully you can see that this is capturing a lot of different scenarios, basically. So we're basically now saying there's strong structure, not just between X1 and the missing data in X2 and X3, but also between the missing data indicators themselves with these arrows. Not at random still, no vertical arrows going up. But this changes in the third plot where we've got values in X2 and X3 are influencing whether you're missing or not in them as well. So now you've got missing not at random, but you've still got the arrows between the diamonds, so it's missing not at random, strong structure. There's loads we can go through, which I won't do, but one more just to give you an instance is weak structure. So now we've got dashed arrows instead of solid arrows, and we're looking at similar types of, I think it's essentially the same as what we had here, but now dashed arrows instead of solid arrows. So everything is now probabilistic relationships. But you can see that this captures lots of different scenarios, and the paper goes through a full characterization of what the different ones, as well as contextual examples. So there's quite a rich different sort of types of mechanisms that we can see appear through these weak and strong structures, and they can manifest in many different ways. Okay, okay, great. Yeah. Now we've kind of characterized and really sort of scoped out what we sort of know about structured missingness and how it can appear. We wanted to look at, which was actually one of the sort of key challenges in that original paper, I guess. We wanted to sort of see about how we can address it. And so there's different purposes of uses of data, let's say. One key thing is, as mentioned earlier in Maria's introduction, is prediction, so using predictive modeling. In the stats community, obviously, that's a big part of stats, trying to build predictive models. So how can we do that, when we have data sets with structured missingness present, with SM present, right? So that's one of the next things we wanted to look at, like how do we build prediction models when we've got structured missingness? In particular, can we multiply impute missing values here? Because there's this, people who are from the stats community will know that imputation, in particular multiple imputation, is a very popular approach to deal with missing values. So why not try it here for structured missingness? There's various different ways to multiply impute missing values. If in case someone's not familiar with the term, impute basically means fill in from a statistical model. And so we looked at perhaps the most popular one amongst stats communities, particularly the applied stats community, is mice multiple imputation via chained equations, and that sort of is a very popular technique to impute missing values in multivariate data sets, popularized by this package in R called mice as well, but it exists in many different software packages, maybe under some slightly different names, but same general idea. The idea is you impute missing values in your data set one variable at a time through a sequence of full conditional distributions. So if you've got, say, a data set with p variables, you'll impute missing values, say, in x1, conditional on all the other variables in your data set. And you'll do that in an iterative way. So if you're in the T-th iteration, you'll condition on the most recent imputed values of the missing data in X2 to XP. So from a T-1th iteration, you'll then cycle through, you'll do X2 conditional on X1, X3, XP, and then you'll go all the way through, and then you'll start again. And then you'll cycle through multiple iterations until you get some sort of stability. And then you'll do that multiple times again, maybe with different start points to get multiple imputed data sets that can take account of the uncertainty gates for missing values. We investigated the performance of imputation through some simulations in this advanced intelligence discovery paper, which I'll just give a few illustrations here about to see how they did. So we simulated a data set we're calling C, but we kind of, this is sort of thinking of it as sort of patient's clinical information, hence the letter C. It's a relatively big data set, 2,000 observations by 100 variables, so 2,000 by 100 dimensional matrix, simulated from a T distribution with 3 degrees of freedom, to move away from a normal assumption a little bit to make it a little bit more sort of, let's say, textbook, less textbook. Variances in the covariance matrix were set to 1, full correlation set to 0.4. And we simulated a response variable based only on the first 10 variables, sort of a linear combination of the first 10 variables in C, the first 10 columns in C, I should say. And it's sort of normally distributed data for that one. We use a classic train test decomposition, put half of that data into a training set, half in a validation test data set. And we introduce 50% of missing data in C under different levels of dependency of structured missingness, basically. And so that's an interesting exercise in itself. I won't go through the details of that, but I'd highly recommend people who are interested to look at this paper that partners in the program developed. So Hofer et al. 2024. They used copulars to be able to introduce different types of structured missingness. You can reparameterize conveniently using Kendall's tau. So where Kendall's tau goes from 0 to 1. So you can sort of specify the level of structure through that Kendall's tau parameter in this copular. And so when tau is 0, you'll have missingness, without any structure, all the way through to tau equals 1, which is very strong structure. And you can also sort of set how much missing data you want to be present in the data set as well. So we've kept the 50%. Just to give you an illustration of what we mean. So this is sort of an illustration of how the missing data are presented. So missing values are the red squares, and the other data are represented in grayscale with observed values. In both data sets, you have 50% missing data. We've just looked at 30 rows here for convenience, but we can see that when there's no structure in the left, you see that the data are sort of spread quite evenly around, whereas in the right plot, we see that there's a lot more lines or blocks of missing data, but you still have 50% missingness in both data sets. And so you can see that as tau goes from 0 here, tau is 0.8 in the right, so we can sort of play around with the structure and see what effect it has while still preserving the total amount of missing data. Okay, yeah, all right. So how did we make predictions here based on the at the end of the day, we want to build a model that relates C to Y to make predictions for the test data, right? Few different approaches. I don't think anything too crazy or sort of unusual. So baseline is the simplest sort of naive one. You wouldn't probably ever use it, but just as a benchmarking tool. We don't really use this. We don't use the data in C at all here. We're just going to use the marginal distribution of Y to make predictions. Essentially, just take the average of the Y in the training set, predict for all the out of sample Ys. Maximum, again, is unrealistic cheating, but useful for benchmarking. Let's assume we knew all the missing data in C and predict the missing Ys using the true model. So we just use the first 10 variables in C. So we kind of do like the thing that would be the perfect thing to do, which of course we wouldn't know in practice was all right. We wouldn't have that information in practice. So, we should do the worst, we should do the best, really. And now in terms of other approaches, so Lasso is perhaps one of the most popular prediction tools with lots of variables. So we looked at using Lasso to make predictions here. We used the Lasso regression model based on the imputed data in C. So specifically what we mean by that is we multiply impute all the missing values in C, both in the training and validation sets. because it's multiply imputing, we're doing it multiple times because we're probabilistically imputing the missing data. We'll get M imputed training sets and M imputed validation sets. We fit lasso models to each of the imputed training sets. So we get M different lasso models with M sets of regression coefficients. And then in each of the M imputed validation sets, we're going to use those regression coefficients to estimate the Y, or predict Y, I should say, and we'll get M predictions for each observation Y, which we're going to average to get a single prediction. So we've got to sort of take account of a multiple nature, but that's not too complicated to do. It naturally fits within our sort of multiple imputation spirit framework. Okay, so that's the lasso model, which probably is the thing you'd think is the sort of most sensible thing to do, I guess, or something like that. Some comparators though, non-lasso, same spirit as the lasso approach, but we're just not going to use lasso. We'll just use a normal linear regression, so no shrinkage. Just use a standard regression model to make predictions, but averaged over the multiple imputations, and we'll use all 100 variables. And then the reduced model is a bit cheating, but still useful to kind of think about in terms of the comparator. It's like the non-lasso again, but we're not going to use the variables 11 to 100 because these were never used to predict Y. So they're not predictive of Y, but they could help build better imputation models for the predictive variables, the first 10 variables in C. So we're just going to ignore the last 90 variables in C, and we're just going to impute the first 10 and just fit a model, a normal model on those 10. So it's essentially like using the true model for prediction, which we wouldn't know in practice. Okay, results. So I'm just going to give one instance of what we saw, but the results were quite stable across multiple iterations. So based on one sort of instance of this simulation run, we can look at box plots of absolute differences between the predicted and true Y values. And we can see that the blue box plots are the baseline, which tend to be the worst. And I'm not good with colors, but the maximum one is on the right. So we can see that does the best. So, you know, those are sort of what you would think of to be expected. But in the middle, we can see lasso tends to do the best amongst the, say, imputation-based approaches. But as and I should have said, sorry, these are presented as the different levels of tau, going from 0 up to 0.99. And we can see that as the level of dependency increases, the performance tends to get worse for all these imputation-based approaches. Even though the amount of missing data stays the same, we're not increasing the amount of missing data, just the level of structure. So we can see imputation starts to struggle as the structure gets more. So we can see that you know, as for that strong level of structure, there's something, let's say, more, you know, challenging being present. We actually looked at a very strong structure. Let's say essentially when tau is equal to 1 through a data linkage example. So a strong structured missingness in that same paper. So just to give you that, what we did there, and that links onto the last piece of work really. We looked at linking C with another data source G, again in this hypothetical simulation experiment, which is also of the same dimension as C in terms of number of variables, 100 variables, and together that would produce an even larger data set D. And so G represents some sort of genetic information. Say we have on, say, half of the subjects in C. So half of the subjects are completely missing in G, half have G measured. And so we've got some clinical data, some genetic data now that we want to sort of build into some sort of combined model for prediction. So now, how did we sort of proceed here? We assumed, again, all data are multivariate T-distributed with 3 degrees of freedom in the sort of our D data set. Again, correlations of 0.4 between any 2 variables, so some mild level of dependency. And Y depends on the first 70 variables, first 70 columns of G, and the first 10 columns of C. So it depends on both G and C. So there's value to be using the G information for predictions. How can we use D to predict Y? So just to give you just a visual illustration of that. So we've got C data, 2,000 people, 100 variables. G for just, say, the first 1,000 people, but also 100 variables. And we want to use both these 2 data sources to build the bottom model for Y. And so the thing is, when you think of it as like one linked data set, you can see we've induced a block of strong structured missingness in that group of people that are observed on C but not observed on G. So it's kind of a missing data problem again. So we're going to just focus on the lasso approach here because it's obviously the one that seems the most sensible to use in sort of data sets like this. Again, also use mice for to impute missing values where appropriate, but there's still a few different ways we can think about approaching the problem. So we can think of data in two different groups. So we've got a group of people that are observed on both G and C, and a group of people that were only observed on C. And so we considered two different ways to build predictions here. One is to consider groups 1 and 2 together. Treat D as a whole data set, some block missingness, and apply mice to deal with all the missing values, including that block of missing data. The other way, though, is to think of having two different groups, 1 and 2, resulting in two different data matrices, and apply mice to these independently. So you don't need to think of that block of missing data anymore. And so for the group 2, you don't have any G data, so you're just going to make predictions using C alone. So it'd be interesting to see if there are any differences there. Again, illustration. So we have one approach is to impute the missing block so when you integrate C and G together. And the other one is take group 1, which has C and G, build a model for that. Take group 2, which only has C, and build a model for that. And just make predictions within these two different groups separately. So this is what we did. Again, we're looking at one instance of the results were stable across multiple simulation runs. So we look at the absolute differences for the different approaches in different groups. Group 1, that's where you observed on both C and G. It didn't make much difference whether we looked at treating the data set as one whole data set, or we treated the two groups separately. Group 1 seemed to have similar absolute differences. Remember, there's no bias here, it's really all variance. And in group 2, though, we saw that the absolute differences were actually higher for group 2 when the two groups were considered together than when they were considered separately, which was an interesting finding we thought. Basically, what we're thinking is that by imputing this block never existed, right? So we're just introducing a lot of noise into that as well, which might impact on the downstream sort of predictions, in terms of increased variability for that group 2 of individuals, basically. So it's actually better to just treat them separately for the group 2 in that case, when you've got such a large block to deal with and impute. Okay. So that was sort of, we can see that imputation had some benefits. It did handle some types of structured missingness, but also we saw that it struggled in some settings particularly when there was strong structured missingness there. So that's motivated us in our sort of most recent piece of work to look at some non-imputation approaches. There's various reasons, not just that, but that's one of the reasons why maybe taking a different approach might be better. So when this missingness is present as blocks, imputing the missing data could add a lot of noise into predictive models and then impact on the accuracy of the models. Also, importantly, sometimes missing data blocks can present for logical reasons or logical constraints. Then you don't really want to impute for other reasons, right? It's nonsensical to do that. So if you think of the data sets that, say, are comprising different patients, across different groups, and so you've got male patients that were obtaining a series of PSA test measurements for female. So you had PSA. Strange.
No. I don't know. I think it's for the building.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Sorry. Which was coming on this thing. So you might have sort of you might have data on, say, male patients that are having a series of test measurements taken, say some of them might be PSA measurements for prostate cancer, and then you start to sort of integrate different data sources together and you get female individuals introduced as well. They're not going to have any PSA test measurements taken for obvious reasons. So that would be a block of missing data that occurs. And well, mathematically, technically, you might be able to impute values there. It wouldn't make any sense. So again, imputation isn't always the answer. And also practically, when data sets comprise thousands of variables, as increasingly we're looking at, some of the standard imputation methods, such as mice, aren't immediately applicable. So think about fitting a model of like one variable at a time when you've got thousands of variables. It would be very difficult, if not impossible. how much time do I have? Very little. Okay, yeah, I should probably wrap up pretty soon. I'm gonna apologize that I'm gonna give only a very quick flavor. This could probably take half an hour if I wanted to go through it very carefully. But this is the current work that we're doing, looking at a non-imputation approach, particularly when you have large predictor sets. We're talking about now potentially thousands of predictors. So the idea is you have blocks of missing data present through maybe bringing together different sources like we saw in the C and G example. And so I won't go through a lot of the notation, but just P is often going to be larger than N. Okay. And so what we're essentially going to do is we're going to try to fit a model of Y on some function of X, and then again, look at how, for example, predicts performance. But the way we're going to do that is finding a lower dimensional representation of X. We want to call that S, a score matrix, not to be confused with the score matrix in likelihood. It's different name. Maybe we should change the name at some point. And the way we're going to do that is through this sort of principal components decomposition, if you're familiar with principal components. So the idea is you'll find a matrix of estimated loadings. That is, so if X was, let's say, an N by P matrix, L is going to be a P by Q matrix, where Q is much less than P. And so when you multiply X to L, you'll then end up with an N by Q matrix, which is now much lower dimensional representation. And you can use this S matrix instead of your X, and you can use that for anything you would have used the X for. So least squares, partial least squares, logistic regression, depending on what. So that's the goal. Okay. Now, if X was fully observed, that would be easier. It would just be the usual principal components decomposition. But we've got these gaps. So that's where the challenge is. So what we're going to do is we're going to estimate the covariance matrix of all the predictors X, which we can only do based on the pattern 0, really, like in a convenient way, because that's the data that's fully observed, right? This is where full observations are. Those were the complete cases. So we'll use the complete cases to estimate the covariance. Some other ways I won't talk about at the time. And we're going to extract the principal components from that covariance matrix. We'll take the first Q components that correspond to, say, explaining a large amount of the variability. So say 0.98 based on the principal components decomposition you're thinking about. And ideally, if X was fully observed, we would be done. We would basically multiply X to L, and we would get our sort of lower dimensional representation. It would be like a classic principal components regression. Okay, but we can't do that because we've got these blocks, right? So what we essentially do is we work out, for each pattern, we work out the contribution of the different scores. And I think that's all I can probably say on that, unfortunately. We're basically kind of utilizing the information from the different blocks of information and trying to piecewise add them together to complete the different scores from the different missing data patterns. Apologies, that's really light on details. There's more I would have said about that, but I think, I know we want to have time for Q&A. But it's essentially doing something around principal components that's trying to carefully evaluate the contributions each different block pattern gives to those scores. And then we'll construct the score matrix as a lower dimensional representation for X, which can then use for predictions. And I'll just very briefly show you the simulation. So apologies for not going through any of that more. I overestimated what I should cover. And so we look at a data set that has 250 observations and numbers of predictors ranging from 50 up to 2,000. So already we can see from 500 that we've got more predictors than observations. And so that's a very challenging sort of problem in general to be in. So the principal components idea would be good to test. And we're going to compare that with looking at principal components on the complete data as if we didn't have missing data, as well as data imputed by, let's say, a well-known tool called soft impute matrix completion, which is perhaps the logical one to consider in this big data setting. We're looking at, again, some prediction error relative to the standard deviation of the errors here. And we can see this is across a large number of simulations. So although the numbers are small in terms of differences, they are, we believe, meaningful. And we can see that the complete data does the best in terms of prediction error. Even, of course, we're looking at very large settings here. The adjusted scores does pretty well, and it does slightly better than soft impute. But more than that, it has some other advantages. It's much faster than soft impute, 40 times faster potentially, as well as allows us to have some more interpretable summaries. For example, we can add in uncertainty measures as well going forward. That's all I wanted to to say in terms of what we've done. Clearly, we've only done simulation work. There's been various reasons for that. But the thing that we're going to be doing in terms of future work is looking at, as has been mentioned earlier in the slides, in the introduction, we're going to look at applying our modeling framework to the Cancer Genome Atlas, TCGA, data from there. In particular, right now, we're actively looking at that, so it's still to come, but we've got some early results already, focusing on the BRCA project. It has about 1,230 patients, most with cancer, but some without, the classification and prediction task there. And we're going to combine several omics data sets, and the ones we're considering are listed here, but we can clearly see that some have, many predictors, more than, of course, the observations we have in the data, so hence the approach we're looking at, as well as block missingness being present and clearly needing to be addressed when we've looked at the data as well. So that's the kind of the real data bit, is the key component we need to add to what we've done so far on this current work. But I will end there. Apologies, I'm longer than I expected. I really want to thank the partnership for funding this. It's been critical to allow us to investigate this work. And the references I've talked about are here. The 3 sort of papers, as it were, that we've done through this work are listed in the middle. I'm happy to give more details to those if anyone wants to know that. I'll better end there. So some Q&As.
Thank you so much, Robin. And thank you everyone for staying throughout the talk. That was really interesting. Please feel free to type your questions on the Q&A or on the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions.
Robin, I'll ask you a question. Yeah. I was interested in that graphical picture of the structured missingness.
You mean the ones Chris has got, basically, yeah.
Yeah, I like this. Yeah,
yeah, these are really good. Yeah.
So you can come up with a diagram basically that will, for your given data set, encapsulate the structure of the missingness.
I think this covers pretty much. I think this can cover everything, actually. Yeah, this framework. Yeah,
that framework can cover everything, including the previous category, the standard categories.
Yeah,
and then the other deterministic or stochastic categories of structured missingness. Am I right in thinking, so you can never get an edge that goes from the missingness indicator back down, or is that, so for instance, I can see how on the bottom one, if I take the blue block in the middle, you've got a vertical arrow going upwards, and then you've got horizontal arrows going across between the diamonds, but you could never, you would never have one coming back the other way. Or would that be accounted for by?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you could.
So that would be the missingness in one variable tells you the values of some other variable.
Yeah, I guess you could. I mean, I'm just trying to think of a practical instance of where that would arise, but yeah, I mean, but that's something that some other colleagues in the partnership have talked about. That missingness gives you information itself. So, yeah. So the fact that you're missing in something does tell you something about the variable. So actually, yes, I think that can occur. I think I did give one time some illustration about where, for example, if there's some question on, say, sexual dysfunction, and you can see that men are more likely to not report that value, and then if you're missing gender and you're missing that value, you can
use that to infer the gender.
It might be more likely to be a man than a woman. So technically, that could exist as well. So we didn't actually so that maybe we could have added even more plots to this to that. It's already quite a comprehensive, let's say, a lot of different things. But yeah, this really does cover.
I was just wondering if there were very general principles concerning the structure of that network that would indicate that the missingness is like particularly difficult to deal with. Like, so the missing completely at random, then there's just no edges anywhere, is there?
Yeah, this one, yeah.
Yeah, so that's like the simplest possible network.
Yeah.
Whereas the more edges that you put in, the harder the problem's going to be to deal with in general.
Essentially, yes. I think that is more edges, more. And I think also more, as much as that is, I also wondered which edges can we learn about and which can become sort of kind of difficult to disentangle, because some of these ones, I also wonder whether we will only be able to get some marginal representation of it, just because we won't know which is driving it. Will we have information in the data to learn about the edges?
Yeah.
And I think that actually, it wasn't, of course, only able to talk about some parts of the work. I think Janesh was, who was the other piece of work that Maria briefly introduced for network representation, probably had a bit more of an insight into that aspect. But yeah, it's definitely, yeah. It is a definite, I think, open question. Which ones are the most? We know missing not at random is problematic, but even if you step aside from that and you look at the structured nature of it, I think, as we've seen just empirically, the types of structure do seem to cause different challenges in different settings. So, yeah.
Great. Are there any other questions? No, not that I can see. So yeah, maybe we can conclude the talk. Thank you so much, Robin, and thank you everyone for participating. It was great listening more about our theme lead. Thank you, Robin.